Good afternoon and welcome to this afternoon's Target Jobs webinar on commercial awareness. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are this afternoon. So commercial awareness is perhaps one of the trickiest employability skills to define. So we're going to do exactly that in this webinar this afternoon with the help of our two guest panelists. We have Kimberly Campbell from Fidelity International and we have Nofi Akareli from UBS. Thank you both very much for joining us. In a moment, I'm going to ask them both to introduce themselves a little bit more to you. But before that, I'm just going to go through a little bit of admin. You do have a chance to ask questions today, so please do pop any questions you may have for our panelists in the right-hand box to the side of the screen. If you see a question you like that you want answering, upvote that because I will be able to use that to see which are the most popular questions. We'll try to get through as many of your questions at the end. Please do try to keep them relevant to the topic of commercial awareness and relevant to everybody, not just one individual, please, just so that everyone can be helped by the answers. Before that, though, we're going to have some talking points that we've got prepared for the day. And as I promised, I will get the panelists to introduce themselves. So, Nofi, could I start with you, please? Could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thank you very much for having me, first of all. So hi, guys. My name's Nofi. I work here at UBS within the campus marketing space. So looking after all things marketing and attraction and university relations as well. Kind of work with my colleagues in the recruitment team to kind of ensure that we are kind of encouraging students to apply to us as an employer of choice and obviously give insight into what we do here at UBS and the multiple opportunities we have available. So looking forward to having this session with you guys and looking forward to some of the questions coming through.
That's brilliant, thank you. And Kimberly, how about you? Could you tell us a bit more about you?
Hi everyone, good afternoon, or good morning, good evening, wherever you're based. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon to have a chat with both Rachel and Nofi around the theme of commercial awareness. I am the early careers recruiting lead at Fidelity International. In short, that means that my role is based on all things recruitment and attraction related for young and early career talent. We recruit individuals right the way from school into our apprenticeship opportunities, through into our insight programs and initiatives, our internships, industrial placement, graduate roles, and sometimes we even look at PhD and MBA students as well. So quite a broad range of opportunities. Really excited to dig into the topic and to talk to you about commercial awareness, particularly, I guess, from like a finance perspective, but lots of other insights to share too.
That's brilliant. Thank you both for that. And thank you again for joining us. I think it's going to be a really useful session for students. So we are going to talk about how to, improve and maintain your commercial awareness. But if we start with the basics first, in terms of what is commercial awareness? And Nofi, do you mind if I pick on you to start this one off? Oh, sorry, Nofi, I think you're on mute. Okay, we may be having some technical problems. Kimberly, do you mind if I pick on you first?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess in the easiest sense, when we talk about commercial awareness, what I'm really thinking about is what is happening in the world around and kind of how does that impact the company that I work at or the company that you're applying to and the industry as a whole. I think there's a little bit of knowledge around businesses as well, like in how they work, function and operate. And I think those are two of the key things that you should think about when you're thinking about what commercial awareness means. I think when you also think about commercial awareness, it's also thinking about the industry as a whole. So for example, I work in the investment management industry. So who are our competitors in the space? What have been our recent successes? What are some of the key trends that we're seeing? And how are things that are happening in the world around us that you would see every day on the news, how are they impacting us as an organization? So yeah, those would be the, as a foundation of what commercial awareness is.
Lovely. Hi again, Nofi. Sorry about that. If we come straight back to you, we just moved to Kimberly. So could you, say what is commercial awareness in your
So
words?
for me, commercial awareness is about knowing and relating it to an organization, obviously considering applications and interviewing, etc. It's about knowing the organization, knowing around, I guess, what's impacting them in terms of them doing their job, and in terms of the environment as well, what makes them tick, what kind of helps them to kind of proceed, and just knowing around those surroundings and what that would impact the organization to do their job on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect, brilliant descriptions from both of you. And then Nofi, if I come straight back to you, can we talk a little bit about why commercial awareness is so important to employers, why they need it to succeed and keep operating?
Yeah, absolutely. So for I guess a long time, it's when you think about commercial awareness, it's, I guess, in a nutshell, you think about the organization and you think about the impact that it has on.
Oh dear, I think we may be having quite a few technical issues. I'm very sorry, Kimberly. Do you mind if I come back to you again?
No, not at all. Everyone will be used to hearing a lot from me, I guess, by the end. So in terms, I guess, of why it's important for employers, I think when we think about it, we want to know that you're passionate about the area that you're coming into in the business, because ultimately we're looking for you to come into the business and become an expert at what you do. So I think that's important. One of the things also that's really key for us is helping us to predict trends, things that might happen. So looking back at what's happened in the past and how we might use the information and knowledge that we gathered to impact, the decisions that we make in the future. I think it's about being able to, I guess, intelligently speculate about how things that are happening in the wider world are going to affect us as a business and an organization. So from an employer perspective, that's really, really important, but also just understanding, again, the marketplace. So how does that organization, how does it fare, I guess, in the broader marketplace, but also thinking about your role and how you are going to impact the organization's growth and then its growth in the industry as well. So yeah, that would be why I think it's important for new hires to be thinking about commercial awareness.
I'm so sorry, Nofi. It's one of those days for you. I can completely understand what it's like. I think we've all been there over the past year. But would you like to come back to why you think employers need commercial awareness?
Yeah, so I guess it's really important, similar to what Kimberly was saying, it's more about forecasting the future and just kind of predicting potential trends or foreseeing kind of, I guess, potential hurdles that you can face and just planning for that in advance. No one could have expected this time 2 years ago. We would have preempted a world of virtual kind of atmosphere with obviously COVID, but I guess there are some initiatives that we kind of, for example, UBS as an employer have kind of started considering on how can we be more agile in our way of working. And that's one example about that in terms of how to adapt to change. Kind of commercial awareness is really important in terms of understanding what the organizational goals are, the strategy and the long-term kind of, I guess, successes as well.
Lovely, thank you very much.
I'm hoping it should stay.
fingers crossed.
And toes. So yeah, I've just
Third time lucky. So we'll try to break the curse and we'll come back to you straight away. So for students looking to foster a good sense of commercial awareness, what would you recommend?
There are different things, and there's not going to be one rule fits all, by the way, especially within the different industries, but it's just kind of keeping an eye out and in terms of the latest trends. So not only on the employer website, which is obviously going to be useful to get that basic foundation understanding, but just knowing what is happening in the industry that can impact the organization. It will definitely make you stand out for interviews and also help within your kind of business acumen just to know what's going on in the industry. Doing your research, attending these kind of sessions actually would help you, and there will be multiple ones that are free, so you don't necessarily need to think about travel or the cost and stuff like that. There are a lot, especially with the new way of working now, there's a lot of virtual engagement that you can actually attend to learn more information about what's going on in the world as well. But I'm going to stop there just in case I take some of Kimberly's point as well, but I'll leave it with those two.
So Kimberly, then, what tips would you give for developing commercial awareness?
So what I would say is be aware of what is happening around you, and then think about it, and then think about how it's going to impact the business. So for me, I always say to people, you should be watching the news regularly, you should be reading the news, you should be on social media, listening to podcasts. Those sorts of things will help you to develop your commercial awareness. Something as simple as reading the news and reading a story about the fuel crisis or energy prices increasing, where you might just read it and absorb the information and understand how it's going to impact your life. What you also need to do is think about how is it going to impact the company that you want to work at, and how is it going to impact their client base as well. So from thinking about like commercial awareness, it's about you having an opinion. It doesn't have to be the right opinion. You know, you can have, you know, a very different opinion to someone else who's coming through, but it's about taking that information, synthesizing that information, and really having a think about how it's going to impact the business, not just now, but also in the long run as well. So reading and watching the news, you know, there's, as Nofi was saying, there's lots of free places where you can get work experience. So Forage has some really great online work experience opportunities. I think also going to Insight Days, talking to friends, family, maybe you have, you know, being a part of a student society and discussing things that are happening in the world. So you don't have to spend huge amounts of money on subscriptions to the FT or the Economist. You can really just find a lot of information out for free, readily available just on the internet.
That's so true, Kimberly. Just to add to that, Rachel, I guess long gone are the days where you have to make financial commitment to certain things, and now everything is accessible on Google, on YouTube. There's so many places out there that you can kind of even teach yourself certain trades. So try and leverage from that before you commit to certain things financially, because I know there's a pressure that it needs to be paid for it to be valuable. No, that's not the case. So yeah, thank you very much for that, Kimberly.
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic point, that, you know, there's ways to do it without spending on subscriptions. Yeah, really useful points. I think one important thing about commercial awareness is it's not a skill that you can just teach yourself and then it's done. You just add it to your CV. You do have to maintain, because things change. And I think that's why, you know, watching the news, for example, that Kimberly mentioned, it's crucial, because things change. It's not, you've got it ticked off, done. Perfect. That's great advice from you both. And then we've talked about commercial awareness generally now, but then if we break it down a little bit, are there any macro topics that you would recommend students look at that come under commercial awareness? And Kimberly, if I come to you first.
Yes. So I think there are quite a few things. And some of these things will depend kind of also on the industry that you're interested in applying to. So from a financial perspective, and particularly from an investment management perspective, something that we talk about quite a lot is ESG, which is environmental, sustainability and governance. And there's a huge trend at the moment around sustainable investing. So investing in companies that are doing good, that are looking after the environment and the planet, whilst they're still, you know, managing to generate revenue. So I think that is something key, but it doesn't only impact the financial services industry, it also impacts legal, will impact professional services. And so I definitely say to have a look at ESG. Something else that I think we haven't heard too much, I think it got a little bit shadowed by the pandemic, was Brexit. So how is Brexit going to impact us in the long term? So we're seeing right now that there are some shortages, skill shortages, employment shortages. But long term, how do we think that's going to play out? Again, what does that look like from a financial services perspective? What are we allowed to do in the UK versus what do we have to move over to continental Europe? What is the challenges from us as employers, and particularly as recruiters, for getting individuals to come and work in London now? There's going to be some legal requirements there as well. So Brexit, and I'll also just touch on the virtual and hybrid working environment that we have now. I think that has changed a lot of things. So something as simple as the fact that, you know, lots of coffee shops and such likes in London are just not seeing the footfall that they used to see. And they're not generating as much revenue because people are traveling into the city less. So what do we think things will look like in a year from now and 3 years from now? And how are organizations, for example, going to diversify? So if you're a Starbucks or Pret or Costa and you're not seeing those usual people, what else can you be offering? How can you entice people to come back to coffee shops. So sort of starting to think about things like that. But yeah, those are 3 things that I have been following, and I'll hand over to Nofi.
Amazing. You've taken all the good
Oh
points.
no.
I'm joking. I'm only kidding. But those are the key reoccurring themes that I'm having discussions with colleagues in the organization, even my friends as well. And more so probably would impact you guys in terms of the quote unquote agility, and how kind of, I guess, employers are having to adapt with the new way of working, the new hybrid way of working. So it's long gone are the days where you need to be in the office and just work at home and work in the office and from a computer. As long as you've got Wi-Fi, you can work anywhere. And it's all about kind of looking at new ways, whether it's challenging the status quo or looking at efficiency to kind of do what you're doing better, and hopefully less time consuming as well. So I think definitely COVID has fast-tracked innovation. A lot of employers, some of them are struggling and they're probably trying to keep up. And that's one thing, as similar to what Kimberly is saying, it's been quite interesting for me learning about that. And obviously kind of sustainability, ESG, has always been a theme, and it's becoming more and more prominent, more so than ever. But I don't want to reiterate or regurgitate what Kimberly has said, but those are the 3 main points that I would probably say as well.
That's lovely. I think it's good to see, good to have the
nice to
unanimous. They're the 3 very important topics, and I completely agree. Then, Nofi, if I come back to you then and say, so a student's looked about these topics generally, how they're affecting the wider world. How can they then go about applying these topics to a specific employer that they're applying to?
Yeah, so I guess when you start researching and understanding more about what's going on in those kind of areas, you start thinking about and attending kind of the some of the careers fair events to understand what kind of business areas, what kind of divisions that they have. Then you maybe, for example, UBS, we have a global markets division, a global banking division, and then you get to understand really what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, what their key responsibilities are, what challenges they may face, because they will be talking about those things in those topics. And then you will start connecting the dots to see, okay, that's how this could connect. This is how that could connect as well. There's also an opportunity for you to kind of go on Spotify. There's free account as well, so it doesn't have to be paid, but there are conversations, podcasts that have these, that start stimulating this thought, because I know it's not naturally automatic, and that's absolutely fine, but sometimes you just need a little thing to kind of set you off, and then you can start having those kind of conversations with your peers as well. So you can start listening on podcasts or on YouTube about the broader discussion that people are having on those topics. But that's what I would recommend starting off on. Hopefully you can hear me, and it's oh, you're nodding, so that's good. We're getting somewhere.
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly, thank you. And I really like the connect the dots. I think that's really important there in terms of, yeah, bridging the gap between what you're looking at about the employer, what you're looking at in the wider world, and how do they connect. Kimberly,
Yes.
did you have anything you wanted to add there on how to apply commercial awareness to a specific employer?
Yeah, I think, again, thinking about recent stories and then how they impact the business. So I think that's like a great conversation starter, is tell me about, like, you know, a recent story that you've seen in the news, or a recent finance related story, and how it's going to impact us as an organization. So I always say, challenge yourself to think about that. Challenge yourself while you're doing, you know, watching BBC News or whatever else it might be. Challenge yourself to think about that. And I think what Nofi was saying about connecting the dots is really, really important. It's all good and well you having this abundance of knowledge, but how are you going to, like, put it into a conversation? How are you going to share your ideas and your thoughts? If you're coming to events and you're networking, you don't just want to blurt it out, but you want to think about how you apply the knowledge that you've gained in an appropriate fashion. So I think that is something that is quite important. And I think, again, thinking about clients. So Nofi was talking about the different areas in UBS, and similarly at Fidelity, we have 2 primary sides of the business. So we have the investment services and solutions, and we have workplace and personal financial health. And understanding how things that are happening outside will impact those 2 different client bases. So we do a lot around, for example, the retirement space. And if you know anything about retirement, is that a company is, you know, saving your money and they're inputting it in stocks and shares and such likes, with the hope that in the long term, when you're ready to retire, they would have, you know, increased the amount, like built on the amount that they were saving for you. So thinking about like the stock market, how is that going to impact those who are close to retirement? And what happened and how are we supporting them? So connecting the dots with, this is what's happening in the world, this is how it's going to impact the company overall, and this is how it's going to impact their client base. I think those are three of the key points that you should be thinking about when you're trying to learn and absorb information.
That's lovely, thank you. And that kind of leads into the next question, really, which is we've touched a little bit on where to look to develop your overall commercial awareness. So in terms of the news, the podcasts, webinars, but then when it comes to looking for employer-specific information, what should students be looking out for, and where should they be looking? Nofi, if I could return to you first for this one.
Yeah, sure. So the first place would be the website. And that's not just the careers website. So most UBS has a main hub that kind of gives you a wealth of information about some of the latest news, the awards, stuff like that, that you can actually gain some understanding on the broader piece. That would be the first place. The second is social media. You'd be surprised, but if you follow a lot of these employers, we love to talk about what we're doing. We're good at that. So we want to share this information to provide you an insight of what's going on inside. And that's whether that be on LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter. Follow these employers to get an understanding of what they're doing on the back end as well. The other piece is obviously external, but please do bear in mind there are some articles that may not be trusted. So just bear that in mind when you are researching articles, etc. But sometimes you can find information on the news about these employers. But the two I would recommend is the website, social media on these kind of employer social media platforms as well.
Kimberly, how about you? Is there any, I know you may well have covered where to look, but is there anything else you'd want to add on that, or what to look for?
So I would agree, definitely the website is a great starting place. A lot of companies have blogs, and the blogs have got like things that are happening. So we have a blog that's like market insights, and every day someone writes a little blog around what's happening in the world. So it's interesting again to see different perspectives. Podcasts. A lot of companies also run podcasts, so if there are themes and things that you're interested in, that's something that you can look at. And Nofi also mentioned checking for good sources. That is very important so that you're not getting information that's incorrect. So for me, one of the things I think is great is Google News, which I think a lot of people do not use, but you can literally go to news.google.co.uk or wherever you are and type in the company name, and it will bring you up with recent stories that have happened about that company. So you can make decisions and think about things that are happening and how it might impact a business. So for example, has the CEO left? How is it going to impact the organization? What was happening before? Like, are they on a good run? Is there going to be a period of instability while they figure out what happens? So I think Google News is a great resource. I think, again, thinking about the competitors and also thinking about their key partners, you should understand what an organization's unique selling point is. So if you're writing, I want to come and work at Fidelity, or I want to work at UBS, the content that you're using, you should not be able to lift and put into your application for JP Morgan and for Goldman Sachs if you're staying in finance industry. Think about finding out what makes those companies unique, because that shows that you've done your research and that you have a genuine interest in wanting to come and work at that organization. So I think that's important. And then again, thinking about challenges. So think about challenges that the company might be facing now. So as an investment management organization, we keep a close eye on what's happening with cryptocurrencies. Not really in that market, but we still keep an eye on what's going on there. And we also keep an eye on what's happening with robo-advisors like Robinhood and Wall Street Bets that happened earlier this year with like GameStop and such like. Those things are things that interest us and that we're keeping an eye on. And don't think about just now, but think about 5 years, 10 years down the line, how do you think it's going to impact that company and that industry? And I think getting into that thought mindset helps to prepare you for conversations that you might have during your recruitment process or at an assessment center. And just having that knowledge in your back pocket just gives you a little boost and a little upper hand, I think.
Yeah, I think the importance of accuracy is really important, that you've both touched on, check your source. If you're looking at facts about a company, look on the company website as opposed to maybe Wikipedia, the basics, you know. Nofi, was there anything you wanted to add on what you'd expect students to know or have looked at about the company?
For us is definitely understanding who we are as an organisation, what we do. Those are the basics. Then the other aspect is more about our cultures and values, and that is something you can actually see on our website. So that is what sets us apart. So for our key behaviours, there are three, and is, for example, innovation, collaboration, and kind of ensuring that we're accountable, and integrity in a nutshell. But knowing that that needs to align to you first of all, and then also kind of regurgitating that in the interview and ensuring that you are bringing that to life. Similar to what Kimberly said, it shouldn't be a case where in your interview or even your application process, you can kind of, I guess, copy and paste that content. It should be unique to that employer and unique to yourself. So really hone in into why you want to work for that organization, and by attending these kind of engagement and asking relevant questions as well. So for us, it will be kind of, that would be really important in kind of getting you to stand apart from other applications.
Kimberly, I can see you nodding away there, so I'm assuming that is a very similar for you.
Yep, absolutely. I think making sure that the mission of the organisation, values and behaviours are those that align with kind of what you feel and value as a personal, from a personal perspective, is really, really important. So yeah, definitely would highlight that. And I think also one of my recommendations is also, if you have a chance and you have the time, to have a look at the shareholders letter. I think that's always on the website somewhere, but it gives you some really unique insights into an organization, kind of like how things have gone in the last year and kind of where things are going and how they hope things will play out over the next couple of months and years. Obviously, things like the pandemic and other, economic related issues crop up that we're just not prepared for, but at least understanding kind of like the company's trajectory, I think it's really good because you can see whether or not it aligns with you from like a personal perspective. So we'll just echo that. I think all of the rest of the tips Nofi gave were fantastic too.
And I will shortly move on to some questions from the audience. So please do, if you haven't had a chance to put your question in the box, because I think we've only got a couple at the moment. I'm going to suspect that that is because Kimberly and Nofi are doing such a brilliant job of answering my questions that they're not leaving much unanswered. But please do take this chance to put your questions forward if you want to have them asked. Before I move on though, we've talked about now quite a lot about what is commercial awareness, how to build it. But I think what will be really useful to touch on is, once we get to the applications and interviews, how students can start to weave this into what they're doing and let it shine through. So if we start with applications, actually, do you have any tips for how students can demonstrate their commercial awareness in an application? Nofi, how about you? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm hoping you can hear me. Please. Okay, thank you. Okay, good. So with the application process, and each employer is different, our process is quite straightforward. You ask a series of questions and submit your CV. There are no cover letter in our process, so it's really important you try to put as much as possible, obviously with a good balance, and make sure it's concise. So first of all, starting with your CV, there are a lot of things that you want to highlight, and that's not necessarily only the kind of previous internship you have, and the key element is what would be transferable into this role. So whether you're part of a society or a mooting club, or it just shows you've got a kind of well-rounded kind of exposure and understanding about what's going on, not just around kind of the role that you're applying for. So your CV, the content, what you've got in your CV, your extracurricular activities, those are things that you should really highlight. People and employers are looking at that as much as you, but that's what makes you stand out. So it's really important you bring that to life, because that's your way of selling yourself. The application process itself, or the application, I won't go too much into, because we don't have that much. It's just more because throughout the process we get to understand more about you, so it's just more basic information. But for me, the CV is really important, but where you do have the opportunity for the application, you can hone in and talk about some of the transferable experience you have, some of the exposure you've gained from like projects or other kind of initiatives that you've been involved in, whether that be at university or other internships as well. So that's the one thing I would add.
And Kimberly, how about you? Do you have any tips for how to start to demonstrate your commercial awareness at the early stage in terms of submitting your application?
Yeah, so I guess again varies by company. We have a very straightforward process where it's literally upload your CV and then online assessments. But where there are application forms where you have to answer questions, really take the time to do your research and prepare for those questions. If they say you can submit up to 250 words, you should be looking at in excess of 200 words. You should not be submitting a 50-word response to that question. So really take the time to think about sharing the knowledge that you have, and however you've gained that knowledge, think about that. And I think taking time with those is important. And then just to reiterate what Novi said around the CV, that is your one chance to sell yourself. For the most part, at that stage, you haven't met anyone in the business. So that one sheet or 2 pages is your chance to show your unique selling points, why we should give you an opportunity to come through to our application process and potentially for an opportunity at the company. So really take the time to craft that CV, make sure it's tailored to the role. Maybe you're applying to different industries, that's okay, because it's great to intern and to try new things to really find out where you want to go, but make sure that it's tailored to the opportunity you're applying to. So if you've got previous work experience, pull out those transferable skills, but make sure you're also highlighting the things that are important for that role that you are applying to at that moment.
Perfect, that's really nice. And then as we get to maybe the later stages of the application process, whether that's an interview or an assessment centre, do you have any tips for how students can then equally continue to demonstrate their commercial awareness? And Kimberly, if I come to you first, that one.
Yeah, so I think in the interview process is your great chance to shine, because that's when you can start to bring in that content that you have developed. So one of the roles that we have at Fidelity is an equity research analyst. And basically that role is essentially demonstrating your commercial awareness. You need to persuade portfolio managers why they should be buying or selling stock, just in basically. And so one of the things that you can do here is really talk about that knowledge that you've gained and how it's going to impact whether or not an organization should buy or sell that stock. So for example, it could be, I don't know, Adidas. What's happening? What happened in lockdown? Have more people been shopping? Are people shopping online, or are they shopping in store? Have people been doing more exercise or less exercise? Are you buying kit or not? All those things that you've been thinking about and that you've been learning about, you can bring through to your assessment center to kind of help to shape the way that you structure your responses and your answers. So I would say think about weaving that information in and demonstrating you have knowledge, but make sure that it's appropriate to the question that you're being asked, and you're not just throwing that information out there. Think carefully about how you can incorporate it into your responses.
And Nofi, is there anything else you'd like to add for the interviews or assessment centre stage?
Yeah, I think Kimberly's put it nicely there. And we mentioned earlier that it's really important when you're doing your research to start thinking about how that relates to the role that you are applying to. So that's where it's really important, because these kind of topics will probably come up in conversation with maybe the interviewer, and they'll probably ask for your thoughts. What I would also recommend is when you're having these kind of, when you're doing these research, any topics or any questions you want to write down, jot that down, because it could be something that you can ask during the interview, just to make it more kind of a two-way conversation, rather than you saying, oh, this is what I think. Kind of lead it onto the interview as well. And I think that will kind of allow that two-way communication to go on in the interview process, which is quite good. But to reiterate what Kimberly said, try and make it as relevant as possible for the interview. There's no point of kind of discussing potentially Brexit in one conversation and then talking about something completely different. Obviously, if it has an impact, then that's great. You showing the link, which is amazing. But if there are any, please don't mention it. It might not be useful, and kind of, I guess, just kind of talk about other topics that are more suited in that stage.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point there, to not just shove your commercial awareness in their face randomly. To kind of only talk about it if it's relevant to the question. I think it's really important. Would you say there's any other no-nos in terms of talking about your commercial awareness, or anything that springs to mind where you've had it and you've been like, oh no, that's a really bad way to go about it?
I wouldn't say there's any no-nos, but what I would say is try to think of an example that is not the most common thing. So we had a question where it was like, talk to us about something that's happened in the news. And at the time, from what I remember, every single person spoke about the elections in the US and the pandemic. There was lots of other things happening in and around the world at that time. Admittedly, those two things were important. But think about other things. Think about something that's really piqued your interest personally. So I would say try to think a little bit outside of the box. Try to think of something a little bit unique. It doesn't need to be anything crazy, but it's always really refreshing when you hear a great story that someone's been following. That's about, the mining in Latin America or something like that, like something just completely obscure that you just wouldn't expect to hear. So I would say that's also something as well, is not just the main stories and the main headlines that everyone's seeing. Try to think about like particular things and be able to explain why that was of interest to you as well.
Perfect. And that actually, unless you have anything else to add, Nofi, that actually leads really nicely into a question we'd had from a student, which is, we talked about generally how to weave your commercial awareness into your interview, but what happens when you're asked a question very specifically about commercial awareness? For example, it could be as simple as, do you have commercial awareness? Or, tell me about a story you've seen in the news. And the students ask, what advice would you give to an applicant if they're answering a question specifically on commercial awareness during an interview? Nofi, do you mind if I point this one to you? Oh, I think you might be on. Oh, I think we're having issues again. We've done so well. It's been a while. So Kimberly, do you mind if I come back to you?
Yeah. So I think what's really important is understanding what commercial awareness is. So that you can answer that question effectively, you should have a solid understanding of what commercial awareness is. So if someone does ask you, talk to me about your commercial awareness skills, or how do you demonstrate you have commercial awareness skills, I think that is a really great way, is to start by saying my understanding of commercial awareness is, and then to start to give some examples and talk about then, I think, and then that's when you can weave it in. If they are asking you about a story that you've seen, whether it's legal related or whether it's finance related, whatever that story is, go in with, this is a story I've been following. Talk about the story and talk also about why it's of interest to you. Why did you follow that story? And then again, back to connecting the dots. How does that story impact the business, and how does it impact, potentially the role I want to go into? How does it impact the clients? So those are the things you should always be thinking, is how you're going to tell a story and not just state the facts.
Absolutely, thank you. Sorry, Nofi, we went to Kimberly again, but is there anything else you would like to add in terms of what advice you'd give to a student for answering a question on commercial awareness?
So similar to what Kimberly said, it's really important, and as I mentioned earlier, connecting that dot. So yes, you've obtained the information, but how are you going to kind of translate that, or kind of apply it to the organization or the industry, etc.? That's really important. So if you just have a basic understanding about that topic you want to discuss, I probably wouldn't recommend it myself, because you don't want to be put on the spot by the interviewer saying, what do you think about this? And you're just like, yes. So probably focus on topics that you feel comfortable enough to discuss further, should the interview want to kind of develop that as well. But similar to the structure as how Kimberly said, I probably wouldn't change that. I think that would work as well. But I'm hoping you could hear me, because I've stopped. Okay, I'm not going to touch the mute button. I think it's when I touch the mute button, that's when I seem to disappear. But yeah, so I'll leave it like that.
Absolutely, no problem. That's brilliant answers to that question. And I will also put some links in the chat to any articles on target jobs that I think will help with specific questions. So our next question from students is, where, for a student, maybe they haven't even started looking at commercial awareness, would you say where is the best place to start when first beginning to build your commercial awareness? And I will put in an article in response to this question on target jobs, which is quite a good intro to commercial awareness in general. But for now, I will leave you to Kimberly and Nofi. Whoever wants to jump in, jump in.
I probably say, depending on whether it's more on the broader piece or whether it's specifically you want to kind of prepare yourself for the interview process. So if it's on the broader side of things, you probably want to kind of, I guess, sign up to a few kind of articles, similar to what Kimberly said. There's Google Alerts that you can sign up to, just to be aware of what's going on, because you probably haven't figured out what your interest is, which is absolutely fine. So as you start building that rapport and that understanding, that would help you decipher, okay, I need to actually save alerts based on this and based on that to find out more and do some more research. The other piece is obviously on the website. We do have a section on the broader UBS websites to give you insights and bite-sized nuggets about what's going on in our world. And you probably want to visit the employer website and just find out more. But for now, I think you will probably want to start on Google to get an alert there, and then probably listen to a few kind of news articles as well.
And Kimberly, is there anything you'd like to add, or shall I move on to the next question?
I think that was really great, but I would say if you're just starting out, you have the news at your fingertips. Multiple times a day, being refreshed, it's just there. So you can start very basically with following stories and thinking about like your opinions and your thoughts on them. And as Novi said, it's about you generating interest in a particular area. So if you see yourself always being drawn straight to the finance section or the stock market, or you see yourself always being drawn to like personal stories, think about how that knowledge can be utilized and also how it feeds into like a potential career path as well. But yeah, nothing more to add.
One thing I would like to add, Rachel, I forgot to mention.
Of course, go ahead.
Around, I guess, when you're at the stage of, it's like learning a new trade in anything you do, you sometimes have the problem where you overdo it and you end up like dreading it. So just have a good balance when you're doing your research. You're not bombarding yourself with so many things and you're just like feeling overwhelmed with all the information you're obtaining. For example, I have a friend that only watches the news once a day because that's the way that helps her for her mental health. So you may want to kind of decipher how you want to obtain that information and how many times a day you want to, not to overwhelm yourself, especially if it's your first time doing it. And then you can kind of, I guess, start kind of selecting how many times a day or how many times a week you're doing that, because sometimes too much is quite overwhelming. So just having that balance is key.
Lovely, thank you for adding that. So I can see we have had a question from somebody, which I'm going to put a little bit of a twist on it because I think panelists will be able to answer that better. So we had a question on what are the specific podcasts or news websites to build commercial awareness in the legal industry. Now, I'm going to send you a link to an article on targetjobs, which is commercial awareness in law. And Kimberly and Nofi, if you feel like you want to answer that, you can do. But equally, because I know who you work for, if you also want to change that to specific podcasts or news websites for the finance industry, please do feel free. Whoever wants to speak first, go ahead.
So I would say that actually a lot of what you can use for finance, you can use for law. Because ultimately it's not the content necessarily that you're absorbing, it's about how you utilize the content that you're reading. So the same way we've been talking about the news and podcasts, you can do exactly the same thing from a legal perspective as well. So I think one of the newsletters that I sign up to, and I don't even understand all of what I read, but I quite enjoy it, is called Finimize, and it comes every day into my work inbox, and it's the way I start my morning, is that I will read, Finimize, and have a little bit of an overview kind of what's happening. I read it because it helps me to build my commercial awareness so that when I talk to students and when I'm talking to my colleagues across the business, I can understand what they're talking about and I can also contribute to conversation. Although I think about it from a finance mindset, there's also a lot of things and content in there that will impact the legal industry as well. Something we've been talking about quite recently is D&I in the finance industry, and the FCA, which is the Financial Conduct Authority, has issued new regulation for companies. So yes, it impacts us from a financial perspective, but it also impacts us from a legal perspective because it's regulatory change that's happening and impacting us in the industry. So for me, I recommended Finimize. I like Business Insider, although a lot of it's now gone like behind paywalls, which is very sad. Reuters has got a really good news website. The Economist is good. Forbes is great. Like, there's so much free content out there. You can select the information and you can change and think about it from a different perspective. So I would say it's not about this is for finance and this is for legal and this is for professional services. You can use pretty much, I think, the same content across the board.
Nofi, is there anything you'd like to add?
Nicely put. For, I guess, based on your question, Rachel, in terms of finance specific, so I think Financial Times is probably quite inundated and a lot of people use that. Obviously, that's still one big piece, but there are other articles and publications that are listed free on actual Google, so you can actually go on there. There's a section that you can actually go and view some of the articles and publications that have been released. Within UBS, our internal network, there's actually opportunities for us to actually sign up to some of the news that are happening internally, so that keeps me afloat and understanding how we're keeping up with the latest trends and etc. So that's really important for me personally, to kind of ensure that I'm understanding, because it's not only applicable for students. Please bear that in mind. We all need to be commercially minded, and that goes from senior right through to junior candidates as employees as well. So please do bear that in mind. It's not just a one section, and like Rachel said, it's continuously feeding on that. So there's not a point where I feel like I'm 100% commercially minded. I'm continuously building on that and developing it as much as possible, and also having discussions with your peers that could help stimulate some interest as well. Whether you're part of this finance society and you're having discussions about what's going on, and you guys can have that kind of organic and authentic conversations that can actually prepare you for your interview, because you will be having something similar like that as well. So you tend to find that they can be quite good icebreakers as well when you get to a point where you feel comfortable enough to talk about it further.
Thank you very much. And the next question, we've had a bit of a change topic now. So we've had a question around when somebody's reading and analysing commercial news, is there a checklist they should have in mind, or things to keep in mind when they're reading it about what they should be taking in or thinking about?
So we touched up on a few, and Kimberly also mentioned a bit as well. So kind of, I guess, when you're obtaining the information, you obviously understand the topic, what it's impacting now, what it would impact in future, and then if you're applying it to the employer, how does that connecting the dots, as we mentioned earlier on, how does that connect? And then where you need to bring your perspective is, what are your thoughts on that, and what do you think maybe the gaps are that maybe they haven't recognized, or whether what are good or bad within those kind of topics of discussion. But that's what I would start off with. You don't want to go too much, because you're still obtaining it, and then when you build your understanding with it, you can kind of develop those points. But that's what I would recommend.
And Kimberly, is there anything else you would like to add? No, don't worry if not.
Spot on.
No problem. And I can see we've had a couple of questions that are a little bit specific to CVs, not necessarily commercial awareness. So I'm afraid I'm going to move on from them and focus on commercial awareness today. Equally, we have had some questions around specifics to, commercial awareness related to medical negligence or related to public relations. And I would just echo what Kimberly said in terms of it's not necessarily specific to your industry. There might be, if you do some internet research, if you look at podcasts, it may be that you can find podcasts, or you can find news organizations or trade publications that focus specifically on those topics. But I would echo everything that Nofi and Kimberly have said, and the resources they've pointed you to will be helpful for your general commercial awareness. And then it's about you applying that to the industry you're looking at. Kimberly, Nofi, you're nodding, so I'm hoping you're agreeing with me. And I'm going to move on to another question, which we've had one, and I think hopefully we've touched on this earlier in the webinar, but I'm going to ask it anyway because the student has asked it, and is commercial awareness the same as who the company's competitors are? My answer would be no, it's much more than that. That's just one aspect, but perhaps if one of you could expand a little bit on that for me.
Yes, I would agree that it's one aspect. So commercial awareness incorporates having knowledge about who the competitors are in the industry. So, for example, you might see that a competitor company has got a new fund or is investing in a different way. Then you need to think about, what is the competitor doing and how is it going to impact us as an organization, or how will it impact the company that you want to apply to? So yes, understanding the competitors helps, but it isn't all of commercial awareness. There are several different elements that would help you to get a full understanding and like build your knowledge of an organization.
Perfectly put, nothing to add.
Lovely, thank you. And then, so we've had a comment, not so much a question, but it's saying how important sustainability is. So I think actually, if we move on to that a little bit more, is there anything that you would recommend for a student if they're looking to learn more about sustainability, either in general or at your company in particular?
So we do have a few sessions, talks, and one of them is about sustainable finance, actually. So please do visit our website. It's a little kind of plug in there. It's www.ubs.com/graduates. And then in the events section, there are actual topics, not only on sustainability. Next month, we're also hosting a session on how COVID has fast-tracked innovation. So I think that would actually help, because it's not going to be about recruitment. It's just about topics that's going on in the industry. So I would definitely recommend going on our site and registering and attending to gain some more knowledge around those topics.
Yeah, and I would say there's a huge amount of information at the moment just happening around. So I guess last year, I think most people probably have heard of the company Boohoo. That was in the news quite a lot last year because it was a company that was found to be not looking after its employees, essentially. So it was in the cheap and like fast fashion, and they were not looking after their employees. So that's something that feeds into how you invest and how you invest in an organization. So when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about how the organization functions as a whole, how it's looking after its people, how it's looking after the environment. It's not just one thing that we're looking at. So I think as a good basis, a good way to start is to understand the definition of what ESG is. So what is, how does a company impact things from a sustainability perspective, from an environmental perspective, and from a governance perspective? What are they adhering to, not adhering to? Kind of what guardrails do they have in place to make sure that they are observing, the regulations that they need to do so? So I think looking at sustainability is going to be incredibly important for not only this generation, but for generations to come. So yes, it's in the press quite a lot, but also understanding about greenwashing. So lots of companies who are kind of hiding behind, and not really doing what they say they're doing, but putting out lots of big stories of great things that they're doing, but really not really understanding, I guess, and really taking on board the full embodiment of what sustainability is. So there is lots to research. There's lots out there. Again, you can just have a look on the news and pull the stories and start to think about things.
Yeah, I think that's a really crucial point, actually, in terms of sustainability. An employer is a lot broader than you might think. And like you say, it's not just about environmental targets, there are other things. And for example, a lot of companies do have an ESG report that you can read and see what they've been doing. That's just one example.
Net zero as well, like carbon emissions, all of that jazz. There's loads of reporting for sure.
And I think we have time for one more question, and I've just seen this one pop up and I love it because I can really relate to it, actually. There are so many articles on the Financial Times. How do I know which ones to read? So when there's a lot of information on that website, do you have any advice for finding the articles that are going to be the most helpful to them in developing commercial awareness?
So I guess, yes, and that's what I was saying in terms of trying to be aware of how much information you're taking in, especially at the beginning. It's really hard to say, okay, I'm going to read this news because X amount of people have read this article, so I therefore will enjoy it. That's not the case. At the beginning of your kind of journey, as I would put it, you would want to kind of, I guess, be open to the amount of the type of articles you want to kind of, I guess, wanting to absorb. So if you've come across the news and something's happened and you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to look up on that when I go online. So develop that understanding and start from there. Don't try and read 50 articles a day. I would not recommend that, not even 30 articles a day, to be honest with you. There's only so much information you should be obtaining. You've got studies as well. You've got to juggle it all. But just balancing, pace yourself through the articles or the topics you want to develop further on. But I definitely wouldn't recommend trying to digest everything in one go.
I think that's brilliant advice. Kimberly, was there anything you wanted to add? I don't blame you if not.
So one thing I completely agree, like there's just an abundance of information everywhere. So it is really important that you take that time to pull out what's important. But one thing could be starting with things that impact you as a person. So thinking a little bit selfishly, for example, are you paying rent for your apartment block? And have you noticed that you're now going to have to pay more for energy? Like as we approach winter, it's going to get colder. You've been reading lots of stories about the increase in energy prices. So how does that impact you? And you can start reading stories around that, and it will talk to you about the industry. It will also talk to you about other industries and kind of how they're going to struggle as a result of that. So you can start with things that impact you personally. I've been out a few times, and sometimes places are saying, we can't open on a Tuesday anymore as a restaurant because we don't have enough staff. That impacts me personally if my favorite Thai takeaway can't be open because they don't have staff. Why do they not have staff? Then that will start me on a little spiral of why we have a shortage of employees. So you can just start there. And again, when you go on websites, there are some recommended articles as well, like down the side or at the bottom, it would say, if you're interested in this, maybe you want to read this. That's another way that you can kind of try to cut through the noise. But yeah, as Nofi said, take it easy. You don't need to know everything. It's okay not to know some things as well.
I love that. I think the energy that we're hearing in the news, I think that's a really good current example as well.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. We're coming to the end of the session now, and I just want to say a big thank you to both Nofi and Kimberly, because you've hit the nail on the head with every question you've been asked. So thank you very much. You've done a brilliant job, and I think the students come out of this will have a much better understanding of commercial awareness and how they can improve it. Please join me in saying a big thank you to Kimberly and Nofi. I think we might have just lost Nofi, but she heard us say thank you. She knows we appreciate it. And I've also added some links to the commercial awareness articles on Target Jobs in answer to some of the questions, if anybody wants to go and look at them. And if you type in commercial awareness on Target Jobs, it will bring up more articles. For example, I know we have an article specifically on the construction industry, on legal. So I think we have one on IT actually. So, have a browse and take in all of the tips that Nofi and Kimberly have given you and act on them. So big thank you to both of you. I'm so glad you're back, Nofi, so we can say thank you. Thank you for soldiering on.
Thank you very much for having us. Really appreciate it, guys, and good luck in your the rest of your studies and also your application process.
Yeah, completely agree. Second that. Thank you so much for your time and all your great questions.
Lovely. All right, that is the end of the webinar. Thank you and goodbye, everybody.
Awesome. Take care.